All right, are we good to go?
Yeah.
All right, good morning. I have to shut the door, sorry. Just feel myself echoing, it's too much. All right, so I'm Rebecca Lubica, and I am an attorney here at Reno in the corporate section, which means that all things good and boring are fun for me, which you'll learn at the end of this is completely accurate. So just a quick disclaimer, I don't expect anybody to be an attorney or an accountant. And this is a very geeky topic, but I'm trying to try to keep it really simple. Just enough so that you know when you're gonna walk into the fence, but you don't have to solve climbing over the fence by yourself. Just to give everybody an idea of what's coming, because it's gonna be, it's a huge topic. So the goal here is to be an informed citizen, which is always positive, and then also an informed business person. That's all you're gonna walk away with. So this is, here we go. In 2021, as part of the Defense Authorization Act, which talking about devious things, the government enacted what they call the Corporate Transparency Act. And we'll talk about what that's going to do in the future, but the truth is there's a lot of things about corporations that we don't necessarily have to know or get to know, and we're going to change that. The government is going to change that. It's part of an ongoing history that started in 1970 with the Bank Secrecy Act. I'm going to guess the ages of my audience a little bit and say that you may or may not, actually the Bank Secrecy Act predates even me, but before that you could put $10,000 in the bank, no one would have to know if you just handed them $10,000 worth of cash. The banks didn't have to communicate with each other, they were really siloed, they had no reporting requirement, fewer reporting requirements. And the government caught on that that wasn't really an effective way of keeping track of what's going on in terms of crime, fraud, and things like that. So they changed, they implemented the first round in 1970. It got updated in 2001 with the Patriot Act, which you may remember a little bit more. Now you can't put $5,000 in the bank without having the notice sent to the federal government. You have to, actually the Bank Secrecy Act is when they started asking you for your social security number and your, like an ID card when you go to open an account. You didn't have to do that before then, you could just open a bank account. Now we've got a little bit more things are being tracked, and this Corporate Transparency Act is going to put it's a third big level that they're adding on to what kind of communications need to happen when you are doing banking. Let's call it banking, but it's more than banking, right? It's moving money around. Let's go to the next slide. The other direction. So this is a general summary of what they're going to do, and it's got the three big parts. So the federal government, as of January 1st, 2024, will begin requiring companies to report the beneficial owners to the FinCEN Bureau. So in my world, there's three big things in this sentence that should make our antennas zip up a little bit. So the first one is January 1st, 2024. Keep that in mind, that's coming quick. The second one is beneficial owners. What does that mean? And then the third one is the FinCEN Bureau. Who's ever heard of that? So keep those three things in mind and we'll come back and I'll explain them all a little bit better. I'm going to go the wrong direction every time. So, good morning. The goal of the Corporate Transparency Act is to stop these kinds of things. These pictures generally tend to look really good, but I kind of ran out of words, so it's a little funny. But if you think about it, and you'll see in my next slide, half of the movies that we watch, or maybe I just watch these same movies over and over again, which is entirely possible, talk about shell companies, corporate fronts, drug smuggling, sanctions, right? You hear these words all the time. But it in my mind, or in my world, it doesn't really have like a context, right? What are we trying to do? There are people with so much money that they're just trying to move it around and not have rules and laws apply to them, right? So we're looking to avoid fraud. We're trying to make sure that people are paying the right amount of taxes. The biggest, if you Google, right, corporate fraud and that kind of stuff these days, the biggest topic is the Russian oligarchs, right? So we have these, there's, I think, like 37 people who have so much money and have unfettered access to Putin. They're basically buying the government actions as they want. The Americans, the Brits, the different countries around the world are trying to implement sanctions on Russia, right? But it's not really impacting them because they're moving their money around in the black world, right? They're moving money around in ways that are not traced by taxes, are not traced by, they don't apply sanctions, don't apply to them. And that's kind of the easiest hot button topic, but it's everywhere. And you can see it from both sides, really. That's the other thing about this interesting topic, right? As much as we want to have your sanctions or fraud, we all want to we'll all pay taxes the way we should pay taxes. Nobody really wants that at the same time. So it's kind of an interesting topic in the sense that it's a lot easier to think about when it's their money, we want them to do what they're supposed to do with it. But if it's our money, then maybe we don't really want to do all those things. So the purpose here is that the American government, and frankly, worldwide, most governments are trying to stop these things, right? So when the drug money comes up from a cartel, where does it go? How does it get back to who owns it? The money, follow the money, right? Crime is always tied to money. It's never, I mean, people are doing crimes for other things, but most of the time there's money involved. The big crimes. So here's my, if this gets you thinking, these are some great places to go and look for more information. There's so many interesting movies and different things. The Panama Papers is literally based on the real dispersal of there's an article in your packet about the millions of documents that were released. The movie The Laundromat is one of the most recent movies, but I will tell you that my husband was so bored, but has been trying to tell me everything is money laundering since he watched it. So he understood it more than he wanted to. But the one I really want to talk about is The Shawshank Redemption, because I think we all have seen it. It's such a good movie. It's so powerful, but I did not realize it was all money laundering. It didn't really put it all together. So just to talk about what kind of stuff we're dealing with and how far back in the world it goes, right? So Andy is Tim Robbins on the left, right? Tim Robbins was a president of a bank in Maine. Now in the movie, some people argue he was innocent. I can't say that. I have no clue. But he goes to jail. And while he's in jail, in order to get favors, he starts helping the warden and the guards avoid taxes, make smart choices with their investments, that kind of stuff. He starts getting favors from the people in the jail. The warden, this is a whole part of the story I just didn't get. I have to go back and watch because I was amazed. The warden has a program where he will take the prisoners to go do construction jobs. And therefore, because he doesn't have to pay for labor, his prices are cheaper. Well, now he starts putting the local construction people out of work because they can't compete. Well, the best way to do that is to compete, is to bribe him not to apply for these jobs anymore. So the warden ends up, he's taking in a ton of money, and Andy, Tim Robbins, helps him hide the money. This is a whole undercurrent story I missed. But so when they go to escape, Andy has taken all the money and put it into an account in one name, not the name he told the warden he was putting it in. The other thing he did all along was he created 2 sets of books. The real books, the money that as it came in, where it came from, what he did with it, and the cooked books so that the warden looked like he was clean. When they escape, what happens is Andy goes to the bank, takes out all the money that he put in under the one name with a driver's license with no picture, and sends the book of what really happened back to the warden. And so the warden doesn't come after him because he's like, he knows the truth. This is the truth of what he's going to tell. So I'll keep my mouth shut. Total money laundering, right? Totally. The money went from one place to the other. It was really not that traceable. He clearly did have somebody on the outside making deposits for him and stuff like that. He literally doesn't have to show a picture ID. 1970, that goes away. He is making deposits more than $5,000. Clearly that goes away with the Patriot Act, and off he goes to live his happy life on the beach. And the warden, I think, actually kills himself. But it's the purest, in my mind, money laundering. Here's it goes from one account to the other. But we don't, money goes into a company. We don't really have insight into what happens or where it comes from all the time, right? Like if you have like strict accounting overseeing, maybe they would want to see where your invoices in and out. Your accountants are going to come and check. Now, if you've paid out more than $600 to another company, you would report on a 1099, right? So these are some of the layers of reporting that are coming into play, but not all those rules don't apply to everybody. They don't apply, so they don't apply universally, and they don't apply on a day-to-day basis. Some of these companies are set up for one transaction. So you have one transaction, that's all you have to look for. So these are just some interesting stories to really like make it seem tangible rather than the newspapers, which actually do a pretty good job making tangible. So anyway, I really wanted to put a big picture of the ocean here because the thought of trying to track down all this money and how it's moving and where it's moving is huge. I mean, it's global, right? There's literally nothing stopping you from transferring money to the other side of the world 3, 4, 10 times a day. These are all organizations that are working to evaluate this kind of stuff, keeping track of the money, looking to see what happens. The Organization for Economic Cooperating and Development is actually put together by most of the Democratic, they're Democratic and also, I'm not going to remember the word, but they're countries that are all working together that have the common interest of where's the money going, what's the most effective approach to this. We can all make laws that do what we think they do, but really you need a little bit of information on how to do it smartly. So just an interesting group of organizations. So let's talk now a little bit about what the US is doing. So here we go again. We got January 21st, beneficial owners, the FinCEN Bureau. So I'm going to start with the FinCEN Bureau. FinCEN Bureau is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's part of the US Treasury. It was established in the 90s. So the Banking Securities Act or Secrecy Act comes out in the 70s. The IRS is kind of in charge of that, but it's really not what the IRS is made to do. And so it does a decent job at the beginning, and then they say, all right, I think we need to branch this out into something new because it's distracting the IRS. So they start this extra bureau as part of the US Treasury. And then when the Patriot Act comes in, now they've got an even extra layer, right? At first, the BSA is just collecting data and trying to use it and give the different jurisdictions authorization to see it. Now we're collecting, we're electronically tracing data, and that changes everything. The beneficial owners, this is the current definition. You can imagine that there are lawyers upon lawyers upon lawyers trying to figure out what this really means. Beneficial owner sounds like a great term, and it'll work to begin with, but as you dig down and you start thinking, oh, do I actually have to do this? Who are my beneficial owners? There are some companies that are going to find a really hard time answering these questions. So one, people, organizations, it could be a right, you could have an organization owned by an organization. So it's a person or an organization that can have substantial control. And it's substantial control of the company, right? So it could be your CFO, it could be just your upper management level. It could be the secretary in the basement who knows everything, not really. But it's decision makers. Two, ownership interests. So who owns the company? Three, do they control at least 25% of the interests? That's a number that's probably going to help a lot of people at least pin their hat on that. And then the other thing is the company applicants. And this is the federal company applicants is what I would call the federal government catching on that the CEO knows what's happening. But the CEO never logs into the federal website and says, this is my date of birth, this is our EIN, right? It's always somebody else who's doing the application. And so the government is caught on that there's really kind of two people, but they really want to make sure that the CEO knows that they're responsible for this. So they're trying to get the person who's responsible for the application and submitting the information to the government, and not just the secretary, which is a generous word for a job that I've done many times. And then three, when we talk about, I'm going to just move this a little bit. When we talk about January 1st, 2024, if you are a new company formed on January 1st, 2024 or later, you have 30 days to report who your beneficial owners are to FinCEN. It's going to become part of the standard how you form a company. It's just going to be one of those new reports. You file with the Secretary of State, you file this, you send your information to FinCEN. If you are already established, then starting January 1st, you have a year to give the full report to FinCEN, which is good because the established a new company, you make it part of your requirements. In order to establish a company, you have to tell me who your beneficial owners are. The older companies maybe don't know and haven't collected that data, or they've collected it and it changed, or it's changed 1,000 times. And so somebody in the company needs to go back and figure out who has substantial control, who owns at least 25%, and who's the company applicant. And that's going to take time. It won't take time for everybody, but it'll take time for enough people. So the good news is also the complicated reports are going to go in after the easy reports. So the easy reports are going to try out the system that has not really been established yet. And so in a year, when the rest of us are trying to catch up, I think a lot of the kinks will have started to be worked out. I know that's a lot, and I can send out the slides, don't hesitate. But I'm watching Ashley take notes too. So. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. So here we are, and the question is, does this apply to us? Do I need to worry about this for my organization? And it's a very funny group of people that this is going to apply to. So, and look, I already found a mistake in my slides. So one, is your entity created through a US state filing? US state filing could also be a native tribe organization. Remember that it's not in our New Hampshire experience, but in a lot of the other states, if you have a tribe, they are exempt from a lot of state regulations. And you may have created your corporate entity through the tribe. If you filed a paper with the Secretary of State to start your organization, then odds are this will apply to you. If your entity was formed under a foreign country and registered to do business in the United States, this will apply to you. If you are at all doing payroll and you've had to submit in a new state because you're now going to pay taxes in that state and you have to file in the state because you employed somebody there, or these are all times that ding, yeah, you have to apply. However, there's a whole bunch of exceptions, and you'll see it's I feel like it's self-explanatory, but we'll talk it through. So if you're a large operating company with a physical office in the United States with more than 20 employees, full-time, US based, more than $5 million in gross receipts or sales in the US are reported on a federal tax return, then you're exempt. Yes. So look who's being targeted here. And because small businesses make for better money laundering. If you're one of those large companies, you're probably public, or you're probably governed by something else that makes you have to report your information. In your packets, I haven't heard that much, but in your packets, there's a list of nope, there isn't. Check it out. There's a list of exemptions. There's 23 exemptions. Here's a general coverage. If you're a bank or a credit union or public accounting firms, so they have other organizations that are going to be watching their money, right? Banks are covered by the Bank Secrecy Act and all sorts of other FinCEN things. They've got that data. If you're a government entity or a utility, you're already so regulated, they're not worried about you as a money launderer, right? Nobody says, let's put all our money in the electric company and get it out with nobody watching. Everybody is watching the utilities. If you're a publicly traded company or you trade securities, you are already being monitored. They're not worried about you. And if you're a tax exempt organization, meaning a nonprofit, even though a nonprofit does file papers to be created by a state, they're already overseen by enough people that they're not, FinCEN doesn't care about them. And then I put the $5 million thing there just because that's a huge exemption, right? Kmart is no longer included, but frankly, they're probably public. Kmart is of course gone, but Target is publicly traded, I'm sure. I don't really know, but so this puts a lot of burden on a small company. Maybe you're starving artist movers, and maybe you don't have 20 employees. Maybe you don't make. Now they're looking at you. They're looking at small companies that nobody's really looked at before. That's exactly who they're targeting, and they're potentially putting a big burden on them. Not too much of a burden in some ways, because of course there's only so many owners, or we've kept track of that kind of stuff. So it depends, right? It's a one-time filing unless things change. And when things change, you have to update your records. But it's not, if you start out at the beginning, the new companies, they're going to be fine. They're going to be very unhappy, some of them, but they could potentially comply without a lot of trouble. So this is a list of what kind of information is being collected. So if you think you fall in the magic window, what kind of information do you have to hand over? Now, what I do have in the booklet is a list of information that you need to provide if you're opening a bank account at Citizens. I went and tried to open a bank account. And if you're trying to create a new business in the state of New Hampshire, just to look, right? Because the truth is, we don't give a lot of information. If you look at the state of New Hampshire, there's 10 things you have to give them. And one of them is your email address. Like, we give our email address to people all the time. You don't tell them who owns the business. You don't tell them, you do give them a principal purpose, but frankly, they don't verify it.
Citizens doesn't ask you for proof from the state of New Hampshire? Like every bank I've TD and Sugar River, all those I've used, they required it to be an open thing.
They require what?
My certificate of existence.
Oh, no, they probably do.
Oh,
They probably do. This is,
oh, but a business
this is
account or personal account?
well, I don't remember.
Okay.
I would say it's probably personal. Because it's probably the only one I had online that I could get into.
Correct.
Right? Like, I'm just looking real quick. But yeah, you're right. You would have to prove, but that's still just proving your existence. It doesn't tell me where your money came from. Right? So if you get a loan from your mom and you're going to start a business, you don't tell anybody that. Well, the federal government is now going to start asking, whose money are you starting this business with? I thought it was interesting that they do ask you, are you or an immediate family member a senior political figure, or are you closely associated with one? Right, I know. But look, number 13 is 73 pages of terms and conditions. That's whatever it is. I read terms and conditions all day long, and I think 73 pages is a lot. They don't ask the federal government when you're starting, or not the federal government, the state government when you're starting when you create a business is not asking that much information. So here's the information that you're going to have to send to FinCEN. Some of it is the company information is pretty basic, right? Who are you? Where are you located? Where are you registered? What's your taxpayer identification number, right? We want to be able to put you in the database and work with you with the IRS. Then the beneficial owner and the company application and company applicant. Now this is for every owner or applicant. It's not difficult information, but some people are not going to want to provide this. If you are a Russian oligarch going to some small nation in order to buy a yacht under a new company's, you're going to start a company that just owns the yacht, right? Lots of organizations just own buildings, which is the purpose of a corporation, right? Is to limit liability. So it's not an unreasonable thing to ask. You're not doing anything that's not smart or protecting of your family, right? If you buy a building in the name of a corporation, that's a good idea. But now we're going to say, well, it's not just the corporation. I am personally tied to this. And so I am personally tied to all these corporations. And there are people who own hundreds and hundreds of corporations. And now we're going to be able to say, oh, but these are all Rebecca's corporations.
Does applicants also mean a manager of an LLC?
Yep.
So your manager or your members,
Yep.
that's every single person. So even though you're a single person owned company, but you have managers that help manage on your LLC formation.
If they have substantial control, ownership interest, control at least 25% of the interest. So if you have a member who's 2%, maybe we don't care.
So the manager.
Unless they have substantial control. I mean, they might have.
Right. You could be a 2% and you could have 2% interest, but be the CEO.
So that answers mine.
So then now you have
Yeah.
substantial control.
Because technically, remember I was telling you, there used to be 3 managers.
Yep.
involved. I was 40%. The one who left was 40, and my current co-owner was 20.
Yep.
When those shares were
Mhm.
being back to us, they didn't come to us. They were actually sitting in limbo as 40% of the shares in Starting Artist Movers, but they don't hold.
They're not owned by anybody.
But the company.
Yep.
So technically, I'm over 40.
And she's not,
She's not, but she has like 50% control of the business.
but she has substantial control. And frankly, now I also know that she tends to do the business side of your organization. She's most likely the company applicant.
Yeah.
Right? So they're using decent words to try and capture the function of your organization.
Right.
What we're trying to get at something that's so nebulous, right? We've got so-and-so's out buying yachts. But so-and-so's also buying a building. We want people to be able to move and do business. We don't want to restrict business. But we do want to restrict fraud, abuse, tax sheltering, things like that.
So microscope everybody to catch the
I
few.
don't know how to buy it.
I know, me too. Yeah, I know. Yachts are like my favorite. They're my favorite thing to be worried
It
about.
doesn't need to be big, I mean.
No,
Four bedroom.
right.
Staff, you know.
Staffed, yeah, staffed is key. If you, just before I go any further, so if you look, there's a couple good things here, and there's a couple bad things. And so I have my slide, what can go wrong? But FinCEN is not the IRS, which is, I think, positive. FinCEN has a history of collecting data and keeping it private. One of the pages in here talks about who is entitled to look at the information as you've handed it over. The other show was called The Wire. I don't know if any of you watched The Wire. But in The Wire, there's a lot of talk about calling in to get information about the money. And any of the shows, I watch all the shows. You know, who has access to this data once you hand it in? As a victim of the Office of People Management data breach, right? So anybody who has security clearance had their data breached about 10 years ago by the federal government wasn't doing a good job of like keeping track of it. So like, they're not my favorite people to hand information over to just because they can't keep it that well. FinCEN has a decent history of keeping things hidden. So that's possible.
Who's responsible for reporting to FinCEN? Is that yourself, or is it your accountant that's gonna help you, or your?
Well, that's one of the questions.
Okay.
We don't, it's all new. Welcome to the jungle.
I mean, the
So-
accountant gives you your information on who to send to the state, right?
Right, the
For your-
accountant, when they do your taxes, yep.
Right, so.
So there's
This is
that.
information, not money.
This is information, so who's done your incorporation? We do hundreds of them a year, right? So we have started collecting this data because it's going to have to be handed in. So now when we're setting up companies, we make sure we have this information. We make sure that the agreements don't allow for secret ownerships. But the lawyers don't want responsibility for that. I mean, let's be honest. One of the other articles in here is about the Panama Papers released all the people that were doing these private, secret, quiet corporations in the little countries that allow it.
I mean,
They don't want to go out of
at
business.
the beginning, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
So they're looking for people who are, their function is looking for people who are hiding money, not necessarily out of the country, but I mean, are they like looking for the local hairdresser and bartender that's like putting cash in their pocket? Or they're actually looking for business owners that are filtering cash,
They're looking for people who are filtering cash,
which would be barbers and cosmetologists,
but everybody's right at all the levels.
because they're under 5 million.
Because they're under
Local
5,
memberships.
above 5 million, they think they're already tracking. Right.
Okay.
Right. So they're really just giving themselves a tool to trace money. Full stop. That's what they're doing. What
the
happens
people
that
at-
next level,
to
right, to the small,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But-
Again,
but,
No, that's-
I'm a participator, I can't help it.
right, no, it's good. The thing is that, how what do they do with the information after? We don't know. And how far down does it go, right? If you're looking for RICO money, if you're looking for American money laundering, you're definitely gonna go to the smaller businesses, absolutely,
Yeah,
right?
because they know that the bigger businesses are being tracked,
Because the bigger,
or bigger businesses are being tracked better.
Well, it's hard to launder money in a business like yours, or well, at least like mine, because everything is invoices. You know what I mean? Like, I don't ever get cash. you know,
Right.
And so
And that's-
every dime is accounted for,
that's a good process,
right?
that not every company has.
But also these days, so many companies don't even take cash.
Mhm.
It's card or nothing. You know, and so that's actually a protection for yourself with this situation too, right?
Some.
My husband's a barber.
Right, yeah. The other thing though is that, those are not the companies that are gonna, that's not where people are money laundering.
Yeah, looking for what, 20 grand?
Right, no, we're literally, we're looking at, so if you, I put this in the pamphlet, not on the slides, but there's three charts here, and I thought they were kind of interesting. So this first chart is, where does the money come from? This is where the money is coming from that people are hiding. And it's interesting, the US is a very small, a decently small circle. China is a huge circle. This is the money that they're looking for, right? This is the money. Now, it could end up with a barber in the United States, but the odds are they're going to go through. So here's this is where the money comes from. The second one here is the intermediaries. So, and this all comes about this company called Mossack Fonseca. They are an offshore organization, so a group of lawyers who are, who specialize in helping you open a company that is not in your local area, right? We make hundreds of companies a year. Most of them are either Delaware or New Hampshire, right? These are people who are like, well, what are you trying to hide your money from? We can help you pick the right place. And here are the places that they're hiding the money. These are the places that have the financially savvy, which, if they're in the business to make things happen too. If you open the British Virgin Islands up to all this corporate stuff, every once in a while people come to visit, or there's a lot of money flowing through that it doesn't cost them anything to have for business, right? So you've got filing fees and all that kind of stuff that makes for an industry for them. But what are we trying? What are we accomplishing, and to whose benefit? So this was part of the Panama Papers. They released who they're making all these companies for, what the money is doing. I go back to the yacht with the oligarchs. They're going to like small island nations where they can do these kinds of things. Let's go to the Bahamas and start a company, and I'll put the title of the boat into the company. Now there's a company that exists. It maybe doesn't do any other transactions. So the transactions are not that concerned. Who owns the company that has $1 million, $5 million entity in it? That's what we're concerned with. So look, less than 20 employees, no employees most likely, unless the staff, but the staff might be another entity. So they're really, again, this is the federal government. You have to look at it with both sides. That's what they say they're going to do with the information. Do we really know? No. And the United States is a little bit slow to this. The EU started in 2017. They have already started fighting this out in their courts. What do we have to give? Why are we giving it? Who has access to this data? And we're gonna evolve into the same thing. But it's kind of a new world, right? We're upping the ante from where we were in the 70s, when you didn't even have, literally, right? Shawshank Redemption, we did not have a picture on the driver's license. You can't do that now. And so it's the next knot in the belt that we're going to try and tighten.
And
So
it's fairly vague too.
Right, so that's my thing up here, what can go wrong? Because, it's still early days, they wrote a law, they did have question and answers about the regulations, and there's still some things that are just not answered yet, and then it'll come, but in the meantime, we have to all comply. So what if the company has no physical address? Right, that happens all the time now. Do we have to keep it? Right? They don't need a bank account. I mean, some do, but not all companies need a bank account.
Okay.
Right? What if you make all your revenue outside of the United States? Do you have to answer to this? No answer yet. What if you hire 20 consultants and no full-time employees? Do you so the staff on your yacht are just 1099? Then you don't have to report, even if you have all this money coming in. There will have to be an electronic system set up, right? So that we can put our data into the system. That has not been. They haven't published that yet. It's still kind of early for this.
Sounds like a mini pilot,
Right.
where they're not actually taking.
Well, it's interesting because, right, FinCEN has been collecting data from banks and credit unions and all that kind of stuff. This is the first time they're doing a much more public face to the world. And so more of us will have to be involved in reporting. Most industries have some sort of government reporting. This is going to be government reporting to new, right? Barbers do not usually do anything but their taxes. And so now this is going to happen. And the questions are, who is going to do this? It would make sense that your CPA would help you with it if they do your taxes. But also, if I'm setting up your company, it would be smart for me to collect the data and report it in for you. So I think that some of that is still going to play out. And in 10 years, we'll have some norms, but we don't have any norms at this point.
Would that be something, I mean, seems reasonable that you're setting up an LLC to the state,
Right,
that the state would collect that.
right,
Because if you're running as a sole proprietorship, then that's your problem.
Right.
But if you're already having to report some of this information to state for an LLC, no matter what state you're in, you're writing out, your ownership interests on your state forms.
right. Well, no, remember, it's not your ownership interest. It does say who your managers and members are, right?
Which doesn't actually
It's right.
specify ownership interest.
It's not as right. But I am, when I do an EIN, I am collecting the driver's license or some sort of ID for the manager. So like it is kind of, it's more than I'm doing now, but it is along the same lines. I agree. And that's why the paralegal that I work with, we're setting up so that when she has to do this for next year, she can start collecting. Yeah. But it's 6 months, right? And it's 6 months for new companies, which they're barely thinking about themselves. It's a year for the rest of us.
So if you're thinking about starting a new company, we should do it.
Right, do it now. You'll have 18 months to report rather than 4 or 30 days. And I think that's my last slide. It's kind of interesting, and it's like I said at the beginning, like it's interesting as a business owner, we'll have to comply, and that, add it to the list of things I comply with. And I come from a government contracting background, so I've been complying for years. But it's also interesting as a citizen, like, what's going on? Like, what are they trying to do? And imagine, they have pulled this kind of data before through industry, and now they're really going to the public and saying, I'm going to collect this data too. It's a big, again, I go back to the picture of the sea that I just keep seeing in my head. It's a little drop. These countries are not interested in complying, for better or for worse, but yeah, but it's coming.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last sentence on your sheet, information may be used for law enforcement, national security, or intelligence purposes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's, couldn't
intelligence.
be any more vague,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and you know, define intelligence. Right,
national security.
right,
That's intelligent.
You know, you
Right.
say a couple words.
And
the
what's
same sentence,
secure?
within earshot of anything that's recording,
yeah,
and all of a sudden, you're flagged.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
just for,
right,
Yeah.
so if you're at all a conspiracy theorist, this is right. But on the other hand,
right. How do you stop the idiots that are causing this?
well, right, I mean, it's happening, right, I mean, they're literally, and it is constantly in the news, right, when you listen to the talk about the Ukraine and Russia and China, and what are we trying to accomplish? And you know, war is not dropping bombs the way it used to be. It is so financial, it is so, and so really this is part of that defense that you're trying to implement. The, you know, the oil going between the countries and who has heat this winter, who doesn't, and all that kind of stuff. This is the United States putting their foot into the game in a different way. We have been, if you go back to the list of organizations, we're on everybody's list of not having done very well. So, which shouldn't surprise you, right? We're, especially in New Hampshire, right? We're live free or die. We're hesitant to give that kind of power to our government. But as we move to the more electronic, more digital kind of things, we have to take the hit a little bit more, in my opinion. So, any other questions? Ashlyn?
I didn't know if you could hear me from,
Yeah. a
oh,
little
you
bit.
can, okay. I was gonna say, you know, using QuickBooks Pro, I'm not an accountant or a bookkeeper, but I do offer it to my clients, and I would need information if I had access to that information, and it seems like something, it's great information, thank you.
Good, good.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thanks for actually listening, because I was like, this is so geeky and I love it.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I can't help but think the whole time I'm thinking about how money is transferred, and I look at Walmart and I look at MoneyGrams and I say, you know, are they being monitored? Because there's a lot of money going, and I think what a lot of people don't realize, and especially if they don't have an international mind, is they don't realize that other countries' people are networking with each other in our country. And so there's a lot of money that can actually come in from the Russians, go through the Africans, hit the Indians on the way out, and come back around. And they don't realize that. And so hopefully this is going to, you know, I can see them forming that like database and putting, you know, the information in to see how people are connected.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fascinating.
you're right. It's a web around us that we don't have to be aware of in our everyday lives.
Well, and most people wouldn't, and especially if you don't have any interaction with the international culture. You
Yeah.
don't know how they operate, you don't know who they know. And so once you do, you know, then you can see how it's happening. And it is through money, but it's changing hands that they don't expect.
And we benefit from it. I mean, you know,
Absolutely.
one of the biggest things, right, is real estate. I mean, people are buying real estate in America. You're not gonna lose that much value, right? I remember years ago, when the Chinese, I think, or the Japanese bought Rockefeller Center, right? Like, it was a good investment, and we all want to be entitled to make a good investment like that. You don't want that to go away. But how much do we care about it? And we care about it, especially when it comes to fraud, tax evasion, sanction evasion, right? Those are things we have made decisions about now we want to be able to act in support of those decisions. But it's all going around us. It's not part of my everyday existence. My dress may have been made in Vietnam, but that's about as international as my morning has been. My tea was probably made somewhere else too, right? Like, you know, like we're not aware. It's not ingrained. I don't think people generally know, but there's definitely back and forth.
Well, thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. All right. bye-bye.
Excellent.
I have a question.
Oh,
Can you-
good.
Yes. So how, as a small business, how will we, do you even know, how we'll be informed of, when we have to report, what vehicle will you have to use for reporting? How will they get this information to us?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's not an answer yet. I think that it will become more of a public conversation. I think that the responsibility is on you. There are going to be financial penalties if you don't report. I don't expect that they will be implemented until everybody's had a chance to do it right the first time, because the goal here is the data, not the money. But I would just recommend you keep your ear to the ground and just make a note for yourself, in December to Google this and see what comes up. Look at the FinCEN. It's on the FinCEN website. It's fincen.gov. There is a section about beneficial ownership. That's what they're calling it in their on their front page. And then I will tell you that you should just join me in the geeky gossip conversations and talk about it with your friends. Like, it's coming. I think people are going to have to know more about it. That the barber, who does not tend to gossip about business regulations, unless they, are in their specific industry, needs to know. I mean, I would imagine.
What's funny is my husband is actually very financial and very smart.
Well,
Nobody wants to hear him.
right, exactly. There's no one. I can appreciate that. Luckily, he's married to a chamber member, because that's helpful. My husband fell asleep during the laundromat, but so I don't know, and I can't necessarily imagine my beloved David, whatever, on ABC News in the evening talking about it, but it'll probably have to happen to a certain extent, and if not, then hopefully your accountant or your annual registration. The thing is that because they're going through the federal government, your annual corporate registration is, the 50 states have all different rules, all different approaches. It doesn't touch that. So we'll see. We'll see what people take on and what they don't. And I've encouraged the chamber to replay this as it gets closer to the end of the year, so that people who didn't think it impacted them today maybe learns otherwise. Because we're all going to be kind of fuddling together. I'm not completely cynical. I'm probably less cynical than I should be. But I do think that the FinCEN will have a system put in place. Like I imagine that they're on their way. And the beauty is that they did give themselves a delayed deadline for the more complicated things, so that the new people who are submitting maybe 10 pieces of paper and not 100 will have a chance to try out the system earlier.
If they want the information, you better set up something.
Yeah, right? Yeah,
Better to start with the newer companies that are smaller, less established.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's easier to comply.
right.
Versus the big
And
companies.
right, like those, the old companies where we have to go back and actually digitize the documents because they're not digital yet, or things like that. So I'm hoping that system gets in place and isn't too complicated, but it's a good point that I should have put the FinCEN website on here too. So I
You
will
said
do
that
that.
about yourself. We didn't say that.
No, I know. I told myself that was a good point. I'm smart. I will do that before I send this out though, because that's where we all need to go look and keep track of that. So, good. Any other questions, Meredith?
Yeah, thank you very much. This was, completely off my radar and very informative. I actually do my own business taxes and my own filing. And so,
Yeah.
without someone to say, hey, you have to do this, I don't want to, just not be aware.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and now at all the cocktail parties you attend, you can walk in and say, are you ready? And they'll be like, for what? And then you can tell them and they will either be your friends because they like geeky things too, or they will just go, oh, Rebecca. Okay. I do it at funerals too.
I got the TSA pre-check, so I can go through the line.
Yes.
At the airport, and by the way, I used it twice in the last one. It is so much.
It's
faster.
fabulous, yes.
But it was odd giving them
Yes.
all that information so that you're pre-checked, so they've already pre-checked your ID, they know who you are, you don't have to take your shoes off.
But again, it's not that's again, not necessarily information they don't already have.
Correct.
They're putting it all in one place. It's like, this is the argument I gave my husband. Like, your government issued ID is government issued, and now I have a real ID, so and it's tied to my passport, right? So it's like, it's just moving the data into a new place. Some of this is data we've never given. You'll be amazed at how many people don't want to give this because it's money, but yeah, the
It's
pre-check
also a
is worth
situation
it.
where you want to sit down with your members or people of your company and say, hey, this is coming. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't want to have to provide this information, we
Sell
can
your
discuss.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And they can also, and I don't think this is conspiracy theorist kind of thing, but you're giving them the information and them collecting
oh, because they cannot get it any other way, right?
it.
That's what's so interesting, right?
Voluntary, involuntary submission of information.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are financial penalties for not complying.
right.
Is it like the healthcare penalty?
No, it's bigger, but yes. And it's daily.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
So once they decide to, then I figured we didn't really need to know what they were, so I didn't memorize them, but it was like $5,000 a day. Like, it's like, hand it over, folks,
That's more heavy-handed than the W-2.
right?
Or,
Right.
or the health insurance thing, like we're all required to have health insurance or
Right.
penalized. Like, I've never heard anybody complain
About the $75, right,
for not having
No,
health insurance.
right,
That's
right,
what they're gonna complain about.
right,
Yeah.
right. Because look, who are they trying to go after, right?
Business owners, yeah.
But not really. They're business owners, but not ones who are keeping books on the business, right? Like, if we're talking about, if you, a $5,000 penalty, a $5,000 daily penalty to a barber, that's a big penalty. Yeah,
We don't.
a $5,000 penalty to some offshore company
That's hiding a yacht.
that's hiding a yacht. They
Not
may
so
take,
much.
they may take 20 or 30 days to make their decision. Like, it's a bottle of fancy wine. It's not.
Right.
But we're all in it. Not all of us, a lot of us are in it. So. Anyway,
Really interesting. I want to watch a bunch of crime movies.
I know, join me. I love this one. I'm gonna slide out.
Go rewatch that.
Yeah, that Shawshank Redemption, right?
I have not seen that in so long.
It was amazing.
I just like, I don't remember this plot.
No,
I don't either.
but you know, at the end, they have all the money.
Yeah.
So, right, so I kept, I kept putting in money laundering movies, and it just kept coming up, and I was like, I gotta look it up, and so, yeah, really interesting.
The underlying.
Yeah, and half of the John Grisham books, right, like, that's all, and he doesn't really, if you look at the Shawshank stuff, then they talk a little bit more about how it's done. The John Grisham, it's just covered, it's a shell company, it's a shell company, okay, well, that was the other really interesting thing I learned is the difference between a shell company and a cover. What's the other word that people use all the time? Let me go back to my funny list of corporate front. So the difference between a shell company and a corporate front. This was interesting, and I probably could have figured it out if I really thought about it. But a shell company does nothing. They are just a company. A corporate front is the bread store by my college in the Bronx that is also got
Yeah.
a card game in the back where money is going through, but they're still running a business. Whereas a shell company is
Someone who owns the yacht.
HVAC number 1 owns HVAC number 2 in Bermuda, so that HVAC number 3 in the United States, so it can't be traced. So that's kind of also the difference between, you know, looking at money, the yacht versus the barber, and looking at the money and how it's traveling. The barber is gonna have books. The yacht company, it's not really gonna have books, right? They're just literally the shell moving around what has the ball in it. We'll find out today. And again, we set up holding companies all the time because we want the ownership to be held in a certain way so that these people can be involved. Or so that when we do another, so if you're setting up for one transaction, but you know a second transaction is coming, well, maybe it's easier to have a holding company so that we don't disturb the actual business that's being done, but we can change the ownership interchangeably in 6 months because we'll have more money then. Or, you know, like there's legitimate reasons to do it every day. Every day we talk about those things. There's legitimate reasons and there's illegitimate reasons, and you have to decide where you want to be and how much information is the government going to collect. Just a big, large ethical discussion. And my father said my philosophy degree would be useless. So.
Great, well, thanks to everyone who's online. I think I will close the meeting now, but thank you, that was fantastic.
Anytime.
Very, very.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.